I stood at the edge of my daughter's backyard, one hand resting on the walker they all thought made me weak, while laughter rose from the lawn like smoke. They didn't know I heard the impression, the fake limp, the broomstick, the punchline made of my bones. My son-in-law laughed. My daughter looked away. And in that moment, something shifted. They thought the walker meant I couldn't move, but I did. Straight to the bank, straight to the accounts. And by the time the next barbecue came, every name they'd counted on was gone, except mine. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The grill smoke curled through the maple trees as the late sun burned down over folding chairs and Costco coolers. Kelly's backyard looked like every other one on the block. Trimmed lawn, citronella candles, cheap wine in solo cups. But the laughter that floated across the yard had a specific edge to it. One that Helen felt long before she heard it. She stood near the garden trellis, fingers grazing the rough bark of the fence post, when it started. Wait, let me do it, Kelly said, already halfway into her performance. She hunched her shoulders forward, curled her lips in mock effort, and grabbed a broom from the deck like it was a walker. Oh, Mark, would you please pass the potato salad? You know how these hips don't move like they used to, she croaked, dragging the broomstick an inch at a time, pausing for dramatic wheezing. The guests roared. Someone nearly dropped their beer. Mark, Helen's son-in-law, laughed too, but it died quickly on his lips. He looked at Helen, then back down at his shoes. Across the lawn, Amy's face drained of color. She stood frozen, a paper plate of macaroni untouched in her hand. Helen didn't blink. She watched her daughter, the same daughter who hadn't returned her calls for 2 months after the retirement fallout, contort her aging body into something grotesque. Something deliberately slow, meant to amuse. Kelly, Amy whispered, voice tight. Cut it out. Oh, relax, Kelly waved, back in her own skin now. It's a joke. Mom's the first to laugh at herself, right? Helen smiled. A practiced, precise smile. Only when it's funny. Pat, Helen's old neighbor, sat stiffly near the smoker, his beer warming in his lap. Without turning his head, he muttered low, "One day that walker'll roll over them all." Helen heard it. So did Amy. The moment passed, smoothed over by someone cracking open a seltzer and the playlist skipping to a summer hit no one liked. But Helen didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She stood in the golden light, her pearl pin catching the last of the sun, and held herself straighter than she had in weeks. Later that night, after the guests had thinned and the backyard emptied of its laughter and lawn chairs, Helen returned home. The townhouse was quiet again, shadows long across the tile floor. The metal walker waited by the door, gleaming under the hallway lamp. She rolled it to the kitchen sink, pulled out a clean towel, and began polishing the chrome frame with slow, reverent circles, not because it needed it, but because she did. Each swipe steadied her breath. Each motion quieted the buzzing in her chest. "You still work just fine," she whispered, running her thumb along the curved handle. "Let's see what you can really do." She parked it by the pantry and walked, unaided, down the hallway to the guest room. Her knees ached, yes, but the pain was an old friend. Predictable, measured, unlike betrayal. From the back of the closet, behind spare linens and a space heater, she pulled out a large black binder. A label, faded but legible, read, "Accounts and Assets. HB." The spine creaked as she opened it. Inside, bank statements, investment schedules, handwritten notes, a map of trust structures laid out like a battle plan, and beneath it all, clipped to a sheet of yellow legal paper, a business card she hadn't touched since 2018. Laura Benjamin, Esker, Elder Trusts, quiet asset transfers, no drama. Helen ran her finger over the embossed lettering. She reached for her reading glasses, clicked on the desk lamp, and began making notes in the margin. Adjustments, updates, contingencies. Every number came back to her, every shell account, every dotted line they thought she'd forgotten. The walker sat in the hall like a soldier at ease. The lobby of Bluegrass Federal smelled like laminate wood, lemon cleaner, and cheap coffee, the kind meant to calm nerves. not impress clients. A row of succulents wilted in the windowsill, and a looping slideshow behind the counter promised secure futures with personal care. Helen adjusted her pearl pin as she stepped through the automatic doors. The morning rush had cleared. 2 tellers stood idle, chatting in low tones. A young man in a pinstripe vest looked up from his desk behind the privacy glass. He blinked twice before standing. "Ms. Boyd?" "Mr. Calderon still the manager here?" she asked, polite but flat. "He is. He's expecting you." The man gestured toward the back. "Right this way." Jonathan Calderon was 38, wore a beard he trimmed with mathematical precision, and always called Helen Miss H when she came in during her Willow Glen days. Now he rose from behind a walnut desk, visibly nervous. "Please," he said, pulling out the chair across from his. "You didn't mention a reason in your message, but after seeing the flag this morning, I had a feeling." Helen settled her handbag on the edge of the chair. "What flag?" He turned his screen with a sigh. "There's been a pending transfer request, large, initiated through the online portal yesterday morning. It required joint party approval." Helen's face didn't change, but her fingers curled slightly around the armrest. "How large?" $142,000, Jonathan said carefully. "From the shared equity account tied to the Willow Glen retirement distribution." "And who initiated it?" He hesitated, then clicked the mouse. "Mark Delaney, confirmed by device and location match. There's a delay protocol in place. New transfers over $50,000 freeze until both parties approve. But this came close. I never saw a request. It was probably routed to the shared inbox. Mark updated the contact info 3 months ago. We assumed it was authorized." Helen's voice was ice-wrapped in civility. "You assumed wrong." By the time they walked to the front counter together, she had frozen every joint privilege on the account. Withdrawals, transfers, even view-only access. Her name was now the sole primary on all assets connected to the Bluegrass umbrella. The new security questions weren't family names or favorite pets. They were specific, sharp, impossible to guess. "What color were the chairs in room 5B? What did you whisper the day the badge was revoked?" Jonathan walked her to the exit like a man leaving confession. "I'm sorry this happened, Miss H." Helen turned to him with a soft smile. "It didn't happen. Not all the way." Outside, Pat was waiting in the parking lot in his old Ford, windows down, dog in the back seat panting like it had no business being out this early. "How'd it go?" he asked as Helen slid into the passenger seat. She handed him the now inactive debit card with Mark's name still etched next to hers. He whistled, low and sharp. "That walker just stomped on their fun." Helen let the silence answer. That afternoon she returned to Bluegrass alone. Different outfit, different purpose. This time she walked past the teller line and asked quietly to open a new account. Just her name, just her access. The banker asked if she wanted to include beneficiaries. "Later," she said. "This one's just for now." She left the bank with a new folder tucked beneath her arm, crisp and clean, a future untouched by anyone's fingers but her own. When she got home, she placed the folder inside the black binder under a new tab, Retaliation Liquid. The sun was fading again, and the house took on that soft golden quiet of early evening. Helen poured a glass of iced tea and sat at the dining table, flipping through decades of forgotten numbers and names. Her phone buzzed. Amy. She let it ring. It buzzed again, then stopped. 30 seconds later, a text appeared. "Mom, did you do something to the account?" "Mark's freaking out." Helen stared at the screen. Then slowly, deliberately, she flipped it face down. She picked up her pen and returned to her notes, crossing out one outdated trust and drawing a thick line through a name. The walker sat in the corner, gleaming in the last of the light. Silent, but still in play. The voicemail began with laughter, the high, effortless kind that always came from Kelly after 2 glasses of wine. "Oh, you should have seen her, Amy," Kelly's voice trilled through the speaker. "She parked that shiny walker right beside the buffet like it was a Bentley, all polished chrome and tennis balls. I swear she's got nursing home chic down to an art form." There was a faint giggle in the background. One of Kelly's friends, maybe the redhead from the barbecue. Then the message continued, the tone shifting into something meaner, familiar. "Tell me she didn't actually wear pearls." I mean, it's sweet, but come on. She's one broken hip away from a permanent parking space. Helen let the phone rest on the kitchen counter as the recording ran out. The timer on the microwave blinked 9:47. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between words that still hung in the air like smoke. Amy was standing in the doorway. Her eyes were red, unfocused. She didn't mean that, she said softly. Kelly's just... She jokes when she's nervous. Helen didn't move. Does she get nervous often? Amy swallowed. I told her to stop. I didn't know she called you? She didn't call me, Helen said, reaching over to replay the voicemail. She called you. You just didn't answer. Amy pressed her palm to her mouth as the message played again. The laughter scraped raw this time. When it ended, she turned away, shoulders shaking. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. No tears, Helen said gently, picking up a notepad from the counter. We'll fix it in writing. Amy blinked. What? Words fade, Helen murmured, uncapping her pen. Paper doesn't. By midnight, every light in the townhouse burned low. The dining table was a grid of documents, account statements, property ledgers, life policies, every page marked with colored tabs that fluttered when the fan hummed. Helen's movements were methodical, a woman reacquainting herself with an old rhythm. Amy sat across from her, quiet, sorting envelopes. What are these? Amy asked, tapping a pile labeled Will, Draft 2015. Everything they think they've already won, Helen said, sliding a file toward her. Every signature that says otherwise. Amy wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve. You're not changing your will because of a voicemail, are you? Helen smiled faintly. I'm changing it because of everything. The clock ticked past 1. The sound of papers shifting filled the space where apology might have lived. When Amy finally stood, her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. Helen nodded without looking up. I know. As soon as the door closed, Helen reached for her phone. Laura Benton's office, a brisk voice answered after the second ring. Tell her it's Helen Boyd, Helen said. She handled my trust documents years ago. Of course, Ms. Boyd. She has an opening Thursday at 10. That'll do, Helen hesitated. And please note, I'll be bringing a witness. Morning bled gray through the curtains. Pat showed up at 8 sharp, holding a paper bag of donuts and a thermos that smelled faintly of bourbon-laced coffee. You sure about this? He asked, settling at the table beside her. Helen slid a stack of neatly organized binders toward him. You offered to witness, Pat grunted. I meant for a garden sale or a notary stamp, not this declaration of war. Same paperwork, she said. Different stakes. He took a long sip and nodded. You're the general, Helen. I'm just the guy who signs where you point. She gave a small, satisfied smile. That's all I need. Amy's text came at 9:15. Mom, Kelly's been calling all morning. She says Mark's worried about the account. And now this. Please, don't make things worse. Helen stared at the message for a moment before deleting it. Then she slipped the flash drive containing her digital copies into a manila envelope marked, For Attorney Review, and placed it carefully atop the walker's seat. She whispered, Every step matters. The envelope was waiting in the mailbox like a snake curled in paper. Helen slid it open at the kitchen counter, carefully, as if not to give it the dignity of urgency. Inside, a glossy brochure from the Delaney Family Trust. A post-it note stuck to the top, in Amy's handwriting. Just look it over, we can talk after. A. Beneath it sat a pre-filled form, complete with Helen's name, Social Security number, and Mark's signature already scribbled in blue ink at the bottom. Request to consolidate. Joint assets and long-term medical planning. Helen held the form between 2 fingers like it might leak. At the bottom, the final line blinked up at her. I understand this action is voluntary, with the intent to simplify future asset disbursement among designated family members. She reached for the pen on the counter, but instead of signing, she stabbed it through the center of the page. Then she tore the paper in half. And again. And again. She dropped the pieces into the sink, flicked the lighter from the drawer, and watched it burn to ash beneath the faucet's cold drip. At 9:55 a.m., Helen stepped into the office of Laura Benton, whose hair was as severe as the steel frames lining her walls. The sign on her door still read, Elder Trusts, Quiet Asset Transfers, No drama. Laura rose with the same crispness she always had. Helen Boyd. That's a name I don't forget. Helen handed over a leather folder. It's time. Laura opened it, scanning the contents with quick, practiced eyes. These are solid. Most of the trusts are still valid. A few changes in law since 2019, but nothing fatal. Helen nodded. Good. Laura looked up. This harassment you mentioned. You have documentation? Helen tapped her phone. Recorded? Dated. Voicemail, message trail, account tampering attempts. You'll have it all. Laura's expression didn't change, but her tone did. With that kind of proof, you can redesignate everything today. Life insurance, property, medical proxy, even executor roles. Helen leaned forward. Then that's what we'll do. An hour later, Laura slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. We'll need notarization for this batch. Tomorrow work? I'll bring my own witness, Helen said, and I'll need 3 copies. Laura's pen was already moving. You'll have them. Outside, the sun caught the corners of her glasses as she stepped off the curb. She didn't use the walker this time. She didn't need it. Pat sat on the bench outside a nearby diner, nursing what looked like his 3rd coffee of the morning. He lifted a brow as she approached. Well? Helen opened her purse, pulled out the torn scraps of Mark's trust consolidation form, charred at the edges, folded once. She dropped them into his lap. He grinned like a man who'd just been handed a map to the fireworks. You gonna frame this, or feed it to the dog? I'm making a file called Unwritten History, she said, dry. Or Unclaimed Assets, Pat offered. Either way, wheel them right out of your future. Helen smiled at that, the kind that curled slow, not soft. That night, Amy returned. She looked exhausted. Eyes rimmed red, her blouse wrinkled like she'd driven straight from the school drop-off line. I found Dad's original power of attorney, she said, holding out a file, also their marriage license. I wasn't sure what you'd need, so I pulled everything from the box in the garage. Helen took the file without comment, but her gaze lingered on Amy's hands, shaking slightly. They're scared, Amy whispered. Kelly keeps saying this isn't fair. Helen placed the folder on the table. Fair would have been not forging my signature. Amy looked away. Thank you for the documents, Helen added. Amy nodded, still not meeting her eyes. Do you want me there tomorrow? Helen hesitated. To sign? No. To watch? Maybe. She turned back to the folders, leafing through with the same steadiness she once reserved for board reviews. At 11:17 p.m., Helen opened a new tab in her binder. The label was handwritten in sharp black ink. Final designation, protected. She slid in the file Amy brought, then sealed the folder shut. The lamp hummed quietly. Her phone buzzed once. Mark, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Helen read the message. Then carefully, she turned off her phone, set its screen down beside her tea, and whispered to no one in particular, You haven't seen out of hand yet. Jonathan Calderon had the courtesy not to look surprised. He only adjusted his tie, once, when Helen placed the manila folder on the glass desk between them. The papers inside were stacked with the same symmetry as legal bricks. Living trust documents, policy amendments, and a revised beneficiary statement bearing the Bluegrass federal seal. I'll need these filed today, Helen said, calm but unmistakably firm. Jonathan opened the folder slowly, scanning the top sheet. His brows lifted slightly when he saw the new designation. Primary beneficiary, Amy Boyd. Secondary beneficiaries, Willow Glen Senior Center, Chicago Mercy Free Clinic. He looked up. You're removing all other family members. No, Helen said, folding her hands in her lap. I'm removing those who stopped acting like family. He gave her a slow, respectful nod. We'll update every asset connected to the Bluegrass umbrella. Accounts, securities, CDs, and the retirement vehicle. And the property title? She asked. He reached for a second folder behind him. That will need to be transferred into the newly formed trust. It'll pass outside probate now, exactly how you said it. Good. Jonathan hesitated. May I ask, why leave the clinic and the senior center as secondary? Helen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Because strangers showed me more dignity than people who shared my kitchen. Back at Laura Benton's office, the conference room smelled faintly of toner and eucalyptus. Laura slid on her readers, inspected the last page of the trust revision, and gave a satisfied nod. These names, she said, tapping her pen on the dotted lines, are now legally binding. Amy inherits everything not otherwise assigned. The rest is locked into the charitable clauses. Helen signed with quiet precision, page after page, each signature drawn like a line in the sand. No tremor, no hesitation. Laura stamped each sheet with the thick clack and pop of her desk notary. Power of attorney, both medical and financial, Laura asked. Helen handed over the final 2 documents. Revoked from the prior, transferred to Amy. Laura notarized both. She'll be protected from contestation. You've documented it all. Helen gathered the originals, sliding them back into the black leather folder. The pen in her hand felt heavier than it had that morning, and somehow her shoulders didn't. Outside, the sun was bright against the sidewalk. The sky had shifted to a cooler blue, the air clearer than it had been in weeks. Pat leaned against his Ford with a hot dog in one hand and a Gatorade in the other. He tipped the bottle toward her. "You look lighter," he said, "like you just dropped 100 pounds of regret." Helen exhaled. More like entitlement. He tossed the empty bottle into a trash bin and grinned. "Best cardio you've had all year." She allowed herself a dry chuckle. Bank walks always get the blood going. They stood together a moment, listening to the breeze shuffle through the trees. The parking lot was half empty, a Tuesday lull. "You sure about Amy?" Pat asked finally. "She seems shaky." Helen didn't answer right away. She watched a woman in scrubs walk out of the bank, laughing into her phone. "She's got more spine than she thinks. I'm just removing the parts of the inheritance that would rot her from the inside out." Pat raised his eyebrows. "You always were the chess player." Helen slipped her sunglasses on. "I'm just making sure they never get to flip the board." Back home, she filed everything into her binder beneath the protected tab. Each page slid in with the same finality as a door locking behind her. Her phone buzzed on the counter again. "Kelly. We just want to understand what's happening. You're acting unstable, Helen. This doesn't feel like you." Helen stared at the message for a long time. Then she opened her notes app, typed one word, and saved it. Stable. She tapped the app closed, then pressed her palm against the binder's smooth leather. And as the wind knocked lightly against the kitchen window, Helen turned toward the hallway, where the walker still sat, untouched, and whispered, "You're next." The call came at 9:14 a.m., just as Helen was labeling a new folder, Post-Trust Correspondence. Her phone lit with Kelly's name, the same name that had been flashing all week. She pressed record on the tiny black device Pat had left by the bread box. A habit born from police work he'd never quite unlearned. "Hello, Kelly," Helen said, her tone steady as a plumb line. A breath, then a tremor disguised as control. "Mom, what is going on?" Jonathan called. "He said you changed your accounts. Are you confused? Do you even understand what you've signed?" Helen's mouth softened, though her voice did not. "Perfectly. I know every line I initialed." "That's not possible," Kelly snapped. "You can't just after everything Dad and I—" "You mean after everything I built," Helen cut in. "And yes, I can." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, the sound of disbelief curdling into accusation. "This isn't you. Someone's taking advantage of you. Is it that girl, Amy? Is she feeding you lies?" Helen's fingers brushed the recorder's red light. "Kelly, if you have something constructive to say, say it. Otherwise, this conversation is being documented." A pause, heavy and human. Then Kelly's voice came smaller, almost pleading. "I'm just worried. People your age, there's confusion. Things slip. You're not thinking clearly." Helen felt her spine straighten. "I've never thought clearer in my life." When she ended the call, the silence in the kitchen was crisp as a blade. She stared at the phone for a long moment before sliding it into the folder labeled Protected. By noon, Laura Benton was pacing her office, a mix of irritation and disbelief in her stride. The blinds were half drawn, stripes of sunlight slicing through the room. "She actually accused you of diminished capacity?" Laura asked, scanning the call transcript Helen had forwarded. "Repeatedly," Helen replied. Her tone was mild, but her eyes had that cooled glass shine. Laura set her pen down. "Then we move formally. I'll file a harassment notice and notify the estate review board. Once there's a record, they'll think twice before trying this again." "Do it," Helen said. Laura nodded. "And Helen, Keep recording. Every call, every message. No emotion, no reaction, just evidence. Understood. The lawyer leaned back in her chair, studying Helen the way an architect studies steel reinforcement. You're holding together better than most. Helen allowed a small, humorless smile. I've had practice. That evening, the house no longer echoed the same way. Amy's duffel bag sat near the couch, her sneakers tucked neatly beneath the coffee table. The girl had shown up without being asked, holding a grocery bag of takeout and a nervous smile. Laura thought it'd be safer, Amy said, setting cartons on the counter. Just for a bit. She said, sometimes people who get cut out don't stay polite. Helen handed her a set of spare keys. Then we'll not give them reason to knock. Amy exhaled, half laugh, half relief. Pat said he's coming by with something. Right on cue, the rumble of a pickup truck sounded outside. Pat appeared moments later, carrying a box under one arm. For your front porch, he said. Camera doorbell, records straight to the cloud. If they try anything, we'll have it. Amy blinked. You think she'd actually show up here? Pat met Helen's eyes. I've seen entitlement do worse. Helen said nothing. She only pointed to the wall plate beside the door. Install it. He did, humming quietly while the drill whirred and bit into the siding. The evening light was turning the room amber, dust motes moving like slow sparks. When it was done, the little black lens blinked alive, a mechanical eye watching over them. Pat stepped back, wiping his hands. You're fully fortified now. Helen gave him a measured nod. Almost. At Bluegrass Federal, Jonathan Calderon sat behind his glass desk, long after closing. Helen's trust account glowed on the screen before him. Her recent changes annotated and secure. He toggled a final switch in the client database. Access restriction. Client only. All external logins disabled. He stared at the confirmation notice for a long time before muttering, "They won't touch a cent." Then, leaning back, he allowed himself a thin smile, the kind reserved for quiet victories few ever witness. Back at home, Helen stood by the window, watching the porch camera's live feed on her phone. The street beyond was empty, the sky turning dark violet. Amy was asleep on the couch, one arm draped over a blanket. Helen touched the screen, zooming in on her front gate, just as a pair of headlights slowed, then stopped. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, and when the figure stepped out of the car, silhouetted by the beams, Helen whispered to herself, "So it begins." The envelope arrived 3 days later, pale blue with the county seal embossed like an accusation. Amy found it first, tucked halfway through the mail slot. "It's from the court," she said, frowning as she handed it to Helen. Helen slit the top cleanly with her letter opener, the blade catching light like intent. Inside, a formal notice. Petition for temporary guardianship. Petitioners, Kelly and Daniel Boyd. Grounds, concerns regarding diminished capacity and potential financial exploitation. Helen stared at the text without blinking. So they finally made it official. Amy's face went pale. Can they do that? Helen closed the envelope with deliberate care. They can try. By Friday morning, the courthouse corridors smelled of coffee and furniture polish. Laura Benton walked briskly beside Helen, a sleek binder tucked under her arm, her heels clicking in even rhythm. They requested an immediate evaluation, Laura said. Standard play, claim you're not fit, then hope you crack under observation. Don't give them an inch. Helen's reply was simple. I won't. The psychiatric examiner's office was windowless and faintly sterile, like a waiting room stripped of pretense. Dr. Evan Moran greeted her with polite neutrality, clipboard in hand. I'm to assess cognitive function, orientation, reasoning, he said. You understand the purpose of this? I do, Helen answered, settling into the chair. What followed was a sequence of questions meant to trip the unwary. Dates, word recall, pattern association. Helen moved through each one with a calm so precise it made the doctor's pen hesitate. When he handed her a sheet with geometric puzzles, she completed them neatly, her pencil strokes firm. Do you handle your own finances? He asked. Yes, and I recently revised my trust. You're welcome to verify with my attorney. He nodded slowly. Medication management. I take none, unless coffee counts. A faint smile broke through his professional mask. You live alone? With company, by choice, not necessity. When the session ended, he escorted her to the hallway, his expression now softened by something like respect. Later that afternoon, his report landed on the judge's desk, a single-page summary attached to a neatly tabbed folder. Findings: oriented to person, place, and time. Demonstrates exceptional reasoning, independence, and insight. Independent in all activities of daily living. Recommendation: no evidence to support guardianship. Monday came with gray skies and a packed courtroom. Helen sat beside Laura at the respondent's table, posture immaculate, expression unshaken. Across the aisle, Kelly and Daniel whispered to their attorney, their tones sharp enough to cut paper. Pat slipped into the back row of the gallery, his arms folded, badge glinting faintly under the lights. The judge, an older woman with no patience for theater, adjusted her glasses and looked up. We'll hear opening statements. Petitioners first. Kelly's lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is not about punishment. This is about protection. My clients are concerned that their mother is being manipulated by outside influences and may not be capable of managing her affairs. Laura rose before he finished. Your Honor, if I may, the judge nodded. Laura opened her binder. What you're about to hear is projection disguised as concern. My client is neither confused nor coerced. She has documentation of harassment, recordings of intimidation attempts, and proof that her financial accounts were secure before these petitioners even made their claim. She pressed a button on her laptop. From the speakers came Kelly's voice, brittle, condescending, unmistakable. You're not thinking clearly, Mom. Someone's feeding you lies. A hush rippled through the room. Laura continued, her tone surgical. There's more, but I think this single clip captures the flavor of their concern. The judge's gaze flicked toward Kelly, then back to Helen. Mrs. Boyd, you've heard the accusations. Anything you'd like to say? Helen rose, hands steady on the table. Only that I have lived independently for 31 years, raised a family, ran a household, and survived worse than condescension. I will not be managed now. The judge studied her for a long beat, then turned to the clerk. Petition dismissed, immediately, and let the record show. There was no basis for filing. A gavel struck once. Sharp, final. Pat let out a low whistle from the back, then muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Walker 1, Weasel 0. Even the bailiff cracked a smile. As the courtroom emptied, Kelly brushed past without meeting Helen's eyes. Daniel followed, jaw tight. Face red, Laura leaned in. They'll regroup, people like that always do. Helen adjusted her gloves, voice quiet but firm. Then I'll be ready. Outside, the rain had started, soft, steady, unending. Pat opened an umbrella over her and Amy as they stepped onto the courthouse steps. Round one's over, he said. Helen looked past the parked cars toward the horizon, where storm clouds thickened like gathering intent. No, she murmured. It's only halftime. And somewhere deep in her coat pocket, her phone buzzed. A new voicemail notification flashing under Kelly's name. The voicemail had been venom wrapped in false concern, but the real explosion came 2 days later. Digital, loud, and public. Kelly's post hit Facebook at dawn. 1,000 words of half-truths and sanctimony, framed as a daughter's plea. Please pray for my mother. She's not herself. She's being manipulated by outsiders. We're heartbroken. Within hours, the screenshots spread, but not the way Kelly imagined. Comments rolled in, first cautious, then cutting. Didn't she win her court case? Sounds like projection. People weaponize concern when control slips. Amy found it mid-morning, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, her laptop glowing. You should see this, she said, voice half shocked, half grinning. They're tearing her apart, even the PTA moms. Helen joined her, reading the endless scroll of indignation. Someone had posted the judge's dismissal order beneath Kelly's rant. Another had tagged the Bluegrass federal seal from Helen's notarized trust, citing it as proof of her independence. By noon, sympathy had flipped entirely. The internet had decided. Helen Boyd wasn't a frail woman slipping into confusion. She was a survivor of greed. Jonathan Calderon called that afternoon, his voice brisk but quietly proud. "Mrs. Boyd, I wanted to let you know we've seen the posts circulating. If any mention your accounts or private data, we're flagging and preserving them for record. The bank has a harassment protocol. We'll file documentation with the compliance department." Helen adjusted the receiver, her tone steady. "I appreciate that, Jonathan. I never thought I'd need cyber defense on top of estate planning." He chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised how often family becomes the risk factor." "I'm no longer surprised by that at all." After they hung up, she sat at the kitchen table with her favorite stationery, cream paper with navy borders. In her precise cursive, she wrote a thank you note to the Bluegrass staff, addressed directly to Jonathan and his assistant, for treating legality with humanity, for seeing clarity when others wanted confusion. Signed, Helen M. Boyd. She sealed the envelope with a practiced press and set it aside for mailing. Later that week, Amy burst through the front door with her phone in the air. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "My classmates started a fundraiser. They're calling it Walk with Helen, like literally a walkathon. They want to raise money for the clinic you listed as a beneficiary." Helen blinked, both amused and touched. "That's creative. It's blowing up. Local businesses are matching donations. Even Channel 8 retweeted it." Helen couldn't help a quiet laugh, dry, incredulous. Kelly wanted a spectacle. "She's certainly getting one," Amy grinned. "Except it's your name everyone's cheering for." Helen reached over and brushed a stray hair from Amy's shoulder, her hand lingering for a heartbeat longer than usual. "You did good, kid," Amy shrugged, smiling through the warmth that climbed her cheeks. "It's not me, it's you." By Friday, the story had traveled beyond the digital tide. A reporter from the Lexington Chronicle left a voicemail, polite and insistent. "We'd like to feature your case as a human interest story, a profile in resilience, not controversy." Laura Benton advised restraint, but Helen's curiosity flickered. She called the number back herself. "I don't want a sob story," she said. "If you're looking for tears, I have none left to give." The journalist's tone softened. "We're not looking for tears, Mrs. Boyd. We're looking for truth." Helen hesitated, then replied, "Truth I can provide." They arranged to meet the following Monday, brief, professional, on Helen's terms. When she hung up, Pat was sitting in the corner armchair, half hidden behind the Courier-Journal. He lowered the paper, smirking. "So now you're trending and getting a press feature," he said. "They're trending, but you're ascending." Helen smirked back. "I'd prefer staying grounded," Pat chuckled. "Too late. You've got hashtags, a fan club, and a defense attorney who could moonlight as a PR agent. You're officially public domain." She shook her head, but a glint of reluctant amusement passed through her eyes. "Public or not, I'm still in control." "Yeah," Pat said, folding the paper neatly. "But control draws heat, and from the look of this storm, you're about to get plenty." Helen turned toward the window. Outside, evening shadows cut long across the yard, the porch camera light blinking in quiet rhythm. Her phone buzzed on the table. Another unknown number, area code from Chicago. She didn't answer, but she watched the screen, pulse steady, as the voicemail icon appeared. The preview line read only one sentence. "You won't get the last word, Helen." She reached forward, tapped save, and whispered, not to the phone, not to the voice on the other end, but to herself. "Then I'll make it the loudest." It began with an alert Jonathan almost didn't see. A routine Monday audit, a string of entries under Helen Boyd's client ID. Attempted transfer, foreign IP, failed authentication, retry. By the third flag, he was leaning over his keyboard, pulse ticking faster. Someone had tried to move $60,000 from Helen's trust account into a shell routing number labeled M. Boyd Holdings. The timestamp, 2:13 a.m. Location trace, Chicago suburbs. Jonathan didn't need to guess twice. He locked the system, printed the logs, and dialed Helen's number. "Mrs. Boyd," he said, voice steady but taut. "I need you to come in. Today, if possible. We've detected a breach attempt on your account. Someone used your old PIN, the one you replaced last month." Helen was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're certain it was an internal error?" "Not a chance. The credentials were forged. Whoever did it knew your old security phrase and account pattern. but they hit a firewall before funds moved. We froze everything. Send me the audit report, Helen said. I'm bringing someone with me. Pat drove her downtown in his truck, the kind that rumbled steady but never shouted. He'd heard the details on the way over. The forged PIN, the late-night access, the routing code. Mark, he said finally, the name heavy in his mouth. Helen didn't answer. She watched the street blur past, her hands folded tightly over her binder. Inside Bluegrass Federal, Jonathan met them in a private conference room, papers stacked neatly beside a flash drive. His usual composure had sharpened into something colder. This isn't amateur work, he said. The IP address connects to a device registered under M. Boyd Consulting, LLC. That's a dissolved company from 3 years ago. Pat gave a low whistle. That's him. Helen scanned the documents, eyes calm but unwavering. What's next? Jonathan slid the flash drive across the table. Law enforcement. I've already called in a contact at the Financial Crimes Division. They'll want statements and this data set. Detective Morales met them an hour later at the precinct. She was middle-aged, brisk, the kind of investigator who didn't waste adjectives. Mrs. Boyd, she said, taking the flash drive, we'll need you to confirm whether you authorized anyone to access your funds electronically. I did not, Helen said, nor have I shared my information since the trust was revised. Morales plugged the drive into her workstation. A wall of numbers filled the screen, scrolling code and timestamps. She zoomed in on one line, frowning. Whoever did this cloned your access path. Same login time pattern, same device type, except for the fingerprint mismatch. That's how we caught it. Pat leaned forward. He thought he could ghost her digital shadow. Morales clicked through 2 more panels, then turned toward Helen. Ma'am, this qualifies as elder financial exploitation. Given the forged authentication, we're also looking at attempted wire fraud, felony level. Helen didn't blink. Then proceed. Do you have any corroborating evidence that suggests motive or pattern? Helen reached into her folder and pulled out her phone. Voicemails, the ones they've left since the guardianship case failed. Morales listened through the first one. Kelly's clipped tone, Mark's voice in the background, half muttered but clear enough. We can still fix this if I get in before the next statement posts. The detective paused the playback and exhaled. Well, that's motive, intent, and conspiracy in one breath. Pat couldn't help a grim smile. Guess the weasels took another swing at the board. Morales nodded, closing her notepad. We'll get a warrant tonight. Expect news soon. 2 days later, Helen sat at her kitchen table as the evening news murmured softly in the background. The ticker at the bottom of the screen scrolled the headline. Local man arrested in attempted fraud against elder family member. Amy came running from the hallway, tablet in hand. It's everywhere, she said. They've got footage of him in cuffs outside his condo. Helen kept her gaze on the screen. The image was small but unmistakable. Mark, jacket wrinkled, head ducked, surrounded by flashing lights. Kelly? Amy asked quietly. Helen shook her head. She'll claim she didn't know. She always does. As if summoned, the phone buzzed again. Unknown number, same Chicago area code. Helen let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then sent it to voicemail. Pat, leaning in the doorway, crossed his arms. You want me to block it? No, she said softly. I want it documented. He nodded. You think she'll fold now that he's booked? Helen's eyes didn't leave the window. Outside, dusk painted the neighborhood gold and gray, wind stirring the porch chime into a quiet tremor. She won't fold, Helen murmured. She'll retaliate. The phone chimed again, a notification this time. Voicemail 0009. You'll regret making this public. Helen saved it to the same folder as the others, her hand steady as ever. Then she whispered, barely audible, but certain. No, Kelly, you will. It came in a courier envelope, heavy as arrogance. The return address read, Benton and Sloan, representing Kelly Boyd. Inside was a freshly filed civil complaint. Defamation, emotional distress, damages, $250,000. Kelly was suing her mother. Amy read the first line aloud, disbelief curling her voice. She's blaming you for her reputation being destroyed? Helen adjusted her reading glasses, scanning each paragraph with calm precision. When people can't control a narrative, they sue it. Pat, sitting at the counter, gave a low whistle. She's doubling down on stupid. Helen slid the papers aside. Laura will end it quickly. By Thursday, Laura Benton had already drafted the countermeasure. The courthouse conference room smelled faintly of copy toner and lemon polish as she handed Helen a new file. It's an anti-slap motion, Laura explained. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. In plain English, it's a way to shut down a spite suit before it bleeds you dry. Helen nodded once. Then file it. Laura's gaze softened for the briefest moment. You've been through a lot of battles, Helen. You're handling this one like chess. Helen smiled without warmth. That's because it is chess, and she's playing checkers. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was half empty. Kelly sat at the plaintiff's table in a pale blue suit, expression painted in innocence. Daniel hovered behind her, restless, eyes darting between his sister and the judge. Laura stood when called. Your Honor, she began, voice calm but edged with quiet authority. The plaintiff's claim is not about damage. It's about silencing truth. Every statement made by my client was factual, substantiated, and legally protected. Kelly's lawyer started to rise, but the judge raised a hand. Sit, Laura continued. We have verified records of financial misconduct, fraudulent attempts, and law enforcement involvement. The plaintiff's public embarrassment is a product of her own actions, not my client's words. Anti-slap applies. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through the thick file. After a long pause, he looked at Kelly. Ms. Boyd, were you aware your brother was arrested for attempted fraud against your mother? Kelly's face blanched. That has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with it, the judge cut in. This court is not your stage for revenge. He closed the folder with a sharp clap. Motion to dismiss granted. Plaintiff is ordered to pay all legal costs incurred by the defense. That's my ruling. The gavel struck. One clean hit. Laura exhaled through her nose, not relief exactly, but satisfaction. Pat from the back row gave a slow clap before catching the bailiff's glare and muttering, Sorry, reflex. Outside the courthouse, spring wind rippled through the plaza flags. Helen stood on the steps, papers tucked under her arm, the weight of them already fading. Amy jogged down to meet her. So she has to pay your attorney fees? Helen nodded. Roughly $12,000. And what are you going to do with it? Helen looked up at the sky, pale and cloudless. Give it somewhere it'll mean something. Later that afternoon, she wrote a check made out to Chicago Mercy Free Clinic, the secondary beneficiary of her trust. The amount, $12,000. Memo line, restitution, poetic edition. She enclosed a note on her familiar cream stationery. For care given freely and dignity defended quietly. With gratitude, Helen M. Boyd. Amy leaned against the counter as Helen sealed the envelope. That's poetic accounting, she said with a grin. Pat, nursing a cup of coffee near the window, smirked. Interest accrued, on dignity. Helen chuckled softly, compounding daily. The fallout landed faster than Kelly expected. Her circle, the charity board, the country club lunches, the book club that loved sympathy and avoided scandal, evaporated within a week. Screenshots from the case dismissal circulated like wildfire. Someone even posted the judge's quote as a meme. This court is not your stage for revenge. By Friday, Kelly's Facebook page vanished. Her LinkedIn profile followed. Helen didn't celebrate. She simply filed the dismissal notice into her binder under resolved matters. Outside, the wind pushed through the maples, rustling their new leaves like soft applause. Her phone buzzed again, this time from Jonathan Calderon. Mrs. Boyd, he said when she answered, you might want to check your account notifications. There's something interesting happening. Helen frowned. Define interesting. Jonathan hesitated. Let's just say someone's been buying domain names in your name, and one of them leads to a press site in Chicago. Helen's eyes narrowed. Kelly? I can't confirm yet, Jonathan said. But if it's who I think it is, this isn't over. Helen's voice was quiet, measured. It never is. She hung up, walked to the window, and stared out at the fading afternoon light. The sky the color of unfinished steel. Then she whispered to herself, steady as ever, let her build the next fire. I've already stacked the wood. The ceremony was held in the community hall of Willow Glen Senior Center, the same building Helen had driven past for 20 years without ever stepping inside. Today the air was different. Fresh-cut flowers lined the stage, the scent of lilies softening the sharp brightness of the overhead lights. Folding chairs filled the room, occupied by residents, volunteers, and local reporters with their cameras discreetly poised. A banner stretched across the back wall. Annual service recognition, honoring those who give forward. Helen hadn't expected to be among the honorees. When the letter arrived 2 weeks earlier, she'd almost dismissed it as a misprint, until Laura confirmed it wasn't. Now, standing near the entrance with Amy fussing over the pin on her blazer, Helen felt an unfamiliar flutter beneath her ribs. Not nerves, but disbelief at peace finally being public. Pat leaned against the back wall, his hands in his pockets, the same way he'd stand at a finish line. Didn't even need to subpoena anyone this time, he joked quietly. Helen smiled. A first. Then, as if fate enjoyed symmetry, the local news crew rolled in just as the pianist began playing the soft opening notes of Blue Skies. Across town, in a dim Chicago apartment, Kelly sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of the live stream painting her face pale. The headline beneath the broadcast read, "Local philanthropist Helen Boyd honored for charitable impact." The video showed Helen walking down the aisle between rows of applauding seniors. Someone had caught the moment perfectly. The metallic walker she'd abandoned months ago, now gleaming in front of the podium, pushed forward by an attendant as a symbol. The caption under the replay read, "The walker she no longer needs, but kept, as reminder." Kelly's jaw clenched. The comment section below the clip bloomed with admiration. An inspiration. Proof that grace beats greed. Her kids don't deserve her. Kelly slammed her laptop shut. The sound echoed through her quiet apartment like a gavel. Back at Willow Glen, Jonathan Calderon was the one who took the stage first. His usual banker's reserve was tempered with something warmer. "When I first met Mrs. Boyd," he began, "she came into Bluegrass Federal with documents organized so precisely, we thought she was applying for a job, not revising a trust." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. "She has taught us that precision isn't about control. It's about clarity. And clarity," he added, turning toward Helen, "is how change begins. Tonight we recognize her not just for her gifts, but for her example. Please welcome our most precise client and most unexpected philanthropist, Mrs. Helen Boyd." Applause swelled like a tide. Cameras clicked. Helen stepped up to the podium slowly but without hesitation. The walker gleamed at her side, the sound of its wheels faint under the applause. She adjusted the microphone. "When I was younger," she began, "I believed the most important thing you could leave behind was something tangible. Money, property, security. But lately, I've learned the better inheritance is steadiness." The room hushed. Even the pianist stopped mid-note. "Every time I signed my name this year, it wasn't out of spite or fear," she continued. "It was because every signature is a step. Some steps hurt. Some take longer than we think we can manage. But everyone moves us closer to the life we were meant to protect." Her gaze found Amy near the front row, eyes bright and proud. "To those who think giving is loss, it isn't. It's reclamation. And to those who've stood beside me," she nodded toward Pat and Jonathan, "thank you for being my balance when others tried to tip the scales." When she finished, the applause rose again, louder this time, not polite, but heartfelt. Some stood, others wiped at their eyes. Even the old piano player clapped, grinning. "That's how you sign a life," he said under his breath. As the evening wound down, Helen accepted a crystal plaque etched with her name and a modest check made out to the Chicago Mercy Free Clinic. The same clinic she'd already given to, now strengthened again by her name. Pat walked her out to the parking lot afterward, the night air cool, stars breaking through above. "Guess the community's catching up," he said. Helen smiled faintly. Better late than never. He glanced at the glowing plaque in her hands. "Think Kelly's watching?" "She watches everything," Helen replied. "But she's never learned to see." They reached the car, headlights blinking on. From somewhere behind them, a voice called, "Mrs. Boyd." Helen turned. A courier was hurrying up the walkway, envelope in hand. Government seal on the corner. "For you, ma'am. Just came from the district clerk's office." Helen accepted it, the paper crisp and cool under her fingers. "Another lawsuit?" Pat asked. Helen studied the seal, eyes narrowing. "No," she said slowly. "Different jurisdiction." She tucked it under her arm, her reflection glinting off the car window as she added softly, "Looks like Chicago's not done talking." It arrived 3 mornings after the ceremony. Plain white envelope, postmarked Chicago. The handwriting was unmistakable, hurried, masculine, familiar in the way a scar is. Helen sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside her as she slid it open. The first line caught her off guard. "Mom, I don't know where to begin. Except to say I'm sorry." Mark's script filled the page in uneven strokes, half confession, half plea. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. Kelly pushed, said we could fix things, that you'd thank us later once the money was safe. I panicked. I shouldn't have signed her plan. I shouldn't have used your PIN. I swear I didn't know the law would come down that fast. I was just trying to hold the family together." Helen read it twice. Once as a mother, once as a witness. The letter ended with one last shaky paragraph. "They're saying I might get probation if I cooperate. I'll say whatever truth clears my name, and yours. I just hope you'll remember the good parts, too. Love, Mark." She folded the page neatly, set it aside, and stared at the empty chair across from her. The one he'd once occupied at Sunday dinners, always talking too loud, always eating last. Then she reached for her binder. Inside the legal proof tab, beneath copies of trust revisions and court orders, was the canceled loan document from 3 years prior. Mark's signature forged over hers, his handwriting slanted, careless. Next to it, the forensic examiner's letter confirming the forgery. Helen placed the 2 sheets side by side on the table, her pen poised like a scalpel. She began to write. "Mark, I received your letter. I've read it carefully, as I always read things that try to sound like truth. I don't hate you. I don't wish you harm. But pressure doesn't create character, it reveals it. You forged my name on a loan that nearly emptied what was left of your father's account. You tried again under Kelly's direction, and the law stopped you where love once tried to. I'm sending copies of both the canceled loan and the handwriting report, so that when you talk about what happened, you remember it wasn't confusion, it was choice. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. I can forgive the son I raised, but I will not forget the man who signed my name to steal my peace. Helen M. Boyd." She let the ink dry before folding the pages together. His apology, her response, and the evidence. Amy appeared from the hallway, hair still damp from a morning shower. "You're writing him back?" "Yes," Helen said, sealing the envelope with the same precision she brought to every signature. "But not for his comfort. For the record." Amy nodded slowly. "Certified?" "Of course." At the post office, the clerk recognized her from the news broadcast and smiled warmly. "Mrs. Boyd, I saw your speech. Beautiful words." Helen returned the smile. "They're only words if you don't follow through." The clerk weighed the envelope. "Chicago address?" "Yes," Helen said. "First class certified, with tracking." Amy handed over her debit card to pay the postage. "That's closure," she said, watching the clerk apply the sticker and stamp. "First class delivery." Pat, waiting by the exit, raised an eyebrow. "Guess the case file just mailed itself shut." Helen smiled faintly. "Almost." That afternoon, she drove to Laura Benton's office, the car quiet except for the hum of tires on asphalt. Laura greeted her with the efficiency of someone who'd already anticipated the visit. "The trust filings?" Helen asked. "All finalized," Laura replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "Assets consolidated, charitable allocations recorded, guardianship clauses permanently sealed. No one can contest anything now, not in Kentucky, not in Illinois." Helen exhaled slowly. "Then it's done," Laura nodded. "Legally, yes. Emotionally, that's your department." Helen stood, her reflection caught in the office glass. Smaller than she remembered, but steadier, like steel cooled to final form. "Emotionally," she said, "it's filed too." By the time she reached home, the mailbox flag was already down. The letter en route, its barcode tracking her final words across state lines. She stood at the window, watching dusk creep across the yard. The plaque from Willow Glen sat on the mantel, catching the last amber light of day. Her phone vibrated on the counter. A text from Jonathan. "All trust secured. You're officially untouchable." Helen typed back. "Not untouchable. Just done being touched." She slipped the phone into her pocket and whispered to the quiet room. "Your move, Chicago." The invitation arrived embossed in navy and silver, formal but personal. Bluegrass Federal Bank requests the honor of your presence on its Community Advisory Board for Elder Financial Protection. Helen read it twice, smiling at the irony. 6 months ago, she'd been the cautionary tale. Now, she was being asked to design the armor. By mid-April, she was walking through the bank's marble lobby with Jonathan Calderon at her side. The air hummed with low conversation, espresso machines, and the faint click of polished shoes on tile. Jonathan gestured toward a glass-walled conference room. "We're calling the new policy the Walker Plan. Your name inspired it, technically." Helen arched an eyebrow. "My Walker?" He smiled. "Exactly. It stood for independence with support. We're using that as the metaphor. Every client over 65 will now have a safeguard: secondary authentication, automatic alerts to trusted contacts, and mandatory check-ins before large transfers." Inside the room, a whiteboard gleamed with bullet points and flowcharts. Helen studied them, the scent of marker ink sharp in the air. "You're missing one thing," she said finally. "Empathy training. Fraud prevention doesn't work if your tellers don't listen. People don't stop trusting overnight. They need to feel heard before they'll feel safe." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Noted. We'll add a training module. Call it the Boyd Principle." Helen allowed herself a faint laugh. "Let's keep it subtle." 2 weeks later, the press gathered at the flagship branch for the public rollout. A small podium had been set up beside the gleaming vault door. Reporters angled their cameras as Helen, in a slate-gray blazer, adjusted the microphone. Behind her, the Walker stood polished and unused, placed beside the vault like a relic turned symbol. Jonathan introduced her with his usual composed warmth. "We wouldn't be standing here without Mrs. Boyd." Her courage turned a personal ordeal into a community safeguard. Today, Bluegrass Federal implements the Walker Plan, a new protocol ensuring no one's retirement, savings, or dignity can be quietly taken again. The applause came easy and genuine. Cameras flashed. Helen stepped forward. "It's strange," she began, "to be recognized for surviving what shouldn't have happened. But I've learned that silence feeds exploitation. Speaking up protects more than money. It protects the part of us that believes in fairness." She rested her hand lightly on the Walker's handle. "This," she said, "helped me stand when things were uncertain. Now it stands for something else entirely." Click. A photographer caught the moment. Helen beside the vault, her reflection glinting in the steel, the Walker gleaming beside her. The photo would run on the front page of the Courier-Journal the next morning under the headline, "From Victim to Vanguard, Helen Boyd Leads Reform." Miles north, in Chicago, Kelly Boyd opened her banking app and was greeted by an unfamiliar red notice: "Access restricted." Client flagged under fraud prevention statute. She tried another bank, then another, the same warning. Her phone vibrated, an automated message from her financial advisor. "Due to your association with a pending fraud case, institutional relationships are temporarily suspended." Kelly dropped the phone onto the table, the sound hollow in her small kitchen. For the first time, she understood what exile could feel like without distance. Back in Lexington, the world Helen had built was expanding, not closing. Amy had just finished her interview at the State University's physical therapy program. She burst through the front door waving an envelope, her hair wind-blown from the spring rain. "They offered me the clinic scholarship," she said, breathless. "Full ride, renewable for all 3 years." Helen's smile started small, then spread, slow and luminous. "The Chicago Mercy one?" Amy nodded. "They said they started it in your honor, the Boyd Resilience Grant." Helen laughed softly, the kind of sound that unknotted something in her chest. "Looks like all that paperwork paid off." Amy hugged her tight. "You did this." "No," Helen corrected gently. "We did." Every step counted. That evening, as the house quieted and the sunset spilled honey through the blinds, Helen sat at her desk with the newspaper folded to her photograph. The phone buzzed with a message from Laura Benton. "Bluegrass wants you on the Regional Compliance Board next quarter. Told them you're the reason the policy works." Helen smiled, setting the paper aside. She reached out, brushed a fingertip along the Walker's cool metal frame. The same one that had once symbolized weakness, now polished like a metal. Outside, the wind moved through the maples, gentle and sure, and somewhere in Chicago, a door slammed, the sound distant but fading. Helen looked toward the lighted yard, her voice barely above a whisper, half to herself, half to the wind. Step by step, they taught me where not to fall. Then, after a pause, steady and final, now I'm teaching others how to stand. The invitation came on thick parchment paper, sealed in embossed gold. Bluegrass Federal cordially invites you to the dedication of the Helen Boyd Room, in recognition of integrity, independence, and reform. Helen had to read it twice before believing it. Not a meeting, not a committee, not a policy rollout. An unveiling. Jonathan hadn't breathed a word. When she arrived that morning, the lobby looked different. The familiar echo of heels against marble had been replaced by hushed voices and the faint murmur of camera crews setting up. Floral arrangements lined the hallway, lilies, white roses, and a single spray of blue hydrangeas that matched the bank's logo. A velvet curtain hung across one of the glass-walled meeting rooms, a brass stand beside it draped in navy cloth. Jonathan met her at the entrance, smiling in that rare, unguarded way that stripped the banker from the man. "You didn't think we'd let you walk away without putting your name on the building, did you?" Helen blinked, half laughing. "Jonathan, a policy was enough. You didn't need to—" He shook his head gently. "We didn't need to. We wanted to." Behind him, employees and community members began gathering near the curtain. Pat stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, wearing the kind of smirk that telegraphed pride disguised as sarcasm. Amy clutched her phone, clearly trying not to cry already. Jonathan stepped up to the small podium, his voice steady over the low hum of anticipation. 6 months ago, this building was a place where one woman walked in to protect her future. Today, because of her, it's a place that protects thousands. Every safeguard we've built, every reform we've implemented, traces back to her persistence. He turned toward Helen, eyes warm. "On behalf of Bluegrass Federal, it's my honor to dedicate this space to Mrs. Helen Boyd, the foundation of our Walker Plan, the conscience of our institution, and frankly, our most precise client." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Jonathan gestured toward the curtain. "Helen, if you would." She stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly as she grasped the pull cord. When the velvet fell away, the polished bronze plaque gleamed under the spotlights. The Helen Boyd Room, in honor of integrity and independence beneath it, etched in finer script. Every signature is a step. A quiet wave moved through the crowd. Not applause at first, but reverence. Then the clapping began, slow and genuine, building until it filled the lobby like the steady pulse of rain. Amy wiped at her eyes, laughing through it. "You really made them engrave your quote?" Helen smiled softly. "I didn't. They remembered." Pat came up beside her, tapping the plaque with one knuckle. "Solid bronze," he said. "Almost as solid as your walker." That earned a laugh, even from Jonathan. "Feels strange," Helen admitted, still staring at her name reflected in the metal. "All this attention, all this permanence." Jonathan leaned in slightly. "It's not permanence, Mrs. Boyd. It's precedent." Outside, the news vans lined the curb. The afternoon sun caught the glass facade of the bank, turning it into a mirror of sky. Reporters snapped photos as Helen posed once beside the plaque, her hand resting lightly on the polished walker displayed just behind the glass wall, the same one that had carried her through the storm. That photo would make the Courier-Journal's front page the next morning under the headline, "From Survivor to Standard, Helen Boyd Leaves Her Mark." Across the state line, another woman watched the same photo appear on her phone screen, in a half-empty apartment overlooking the Chicago River. Kelly Boyd scrolled once, twice, then stopped. Her bag sat packed by the door. The camera caught her reflection in the black glass of the phone screen. Older, smaller, out of focus. She turned it face down and reached for the last envelope on her counter. Return address, Office of Financial Compliance, Chicago District. The stamp read blacklisted, permanent. Outside, a taxi idled at the curb. Kelly lifted her suitcase, hesitated only once, then closed the door behind her. Back in Lexington, Helen lingered outside the bank entrance, watching the staff return to their work. Through the glass, the plaque gleamed, a small, steady beacon against the hum of the afternoon. Amy joined her, tucking her arm through Helen's. Feels different now, doesn't it? Helen nodded. It does. It's not about defense anymore. Then what is it about? Helen looked through the glass one last time, at the plaque, the room, the walker, all reflecting in soft gold light. Legacy, she said quietly, and the kind you can't forge. As she and Amy stepped toward the car, the wind shifted, warm and certain, carrying the faint sound of applause still echoing from inside, fading but not gone. And somewhere far north, an engine started. The road opening for someone leaving what she'd once tried to steal. Helen glanced at the horizon and whispered, almost to herself, "Every ending leaves a witness." By the time spring settled over Lexington, the air felt gentler, the kind of calm earned, not given. Helen sat at Laura Benton's oak desk, her pen poised above the final page of her will. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the slow turn of Laura's brass desk fan. The folder before her was thicker now, not with confusion, but with closure. Laura adjusted her glasses, reading aloud one last line. Distributions to the Willow Glen Senior Center Endowment and the Chicago Mercy Free Clinic Fund are to be executed annually in perpetuity. Executor, Amy Boyd. Contingent bequests, none. Helen smiled faintly. Add a footnote, Laura raised an eyebrow. A footnote, Helen nodded. Under the disbursement schedule, in recognition of integrity, compassion, and spine. Laura chuckled, making the note in neat print. You and your poetic accounting. Helen signed with deliberate care, her signature steady and elegant, each letter standing like a final argument made to the world. Laura affixed the notary seal. A soft press and twist, followed by that distinct metallic clack that had punctuated so many of Helen's victories. Executor officially appointed, Laura said. Amy will handle any remaining matters. Good, Helen murmured. She's better with people than I ever was. Later that afternoon, Helen returned home with the document tucked securely in a leather folio. The house felt still but not lonely, sunlight pooling on the hardwood floors, the faint scent of old paper and lilacs drifting from the open window. At the kitchen counter, Amy was sorting through envelopes from the university, her acceptance letter still pinned proudly to the fridge. Is it done? Amy asked. Helen held up the folder. Signed, sealed, notarized. Amy grinned. What about Kelly and Mark? Helen flipped to the final page, tapped it lightly. Each gets $1. The law requires acknowledgement. I've complied. Amy's laughter came bright and unrestrained. You're unbelievable. Unforgettable, actually, Helen corrected, sliding the document into her home safe. She closed the steel door with a solid click, that satisfying punctuation of permanence, and turned the key. Inside, the ledger of her life was closed. By evening, the light outside had turned amber, soft and long. Pat arrived just as the streetlights began to hum awake, his old Ford pickup rumbling into the driveway. He leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, as Helen emerged with her cardigan draped loosely over her shoulders. Ready for our constitutional, he asked. Always, she said, locking the door behind her. They walked in an easy rhythm, the neighborhood quiet except for the distant chirp of crickets and the soft creak of mailboxes cooling in the dusk. Pat glanced at her gait, steady and unhurried. You walk different now. Different how? Like someone who's done carrying things she didn't owe anyone. Helen smiled, the streetlight catching the faint silver in her hair. Maybe I just learned the right stride. They rounded the corner near the park. Amy jogged up behind them, breathless, her ponytail bouncing. Hey, you two trying to sneak off without me? Helen laughed softly. You're just in time for the victory lap. Amy looped her arm through Helen's, the three of them walking in slow sync down the block. Pat nodded at the walker she still used when sidewalks turned uneven. You ever think about getting rid of that thing? Helen patted its handle affectionately. Funny thing about freedom, she said. It's got 4 wheels and a stubborn streak. Amy laughed. I'm putting that on a t-shirt. They reached the end of the block just as the sun slipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows that stretched like the echo of everything they'd survived. Pat stopped, squinting at the orange sky. You ever think about how it all started? Helen's gaze softened. Every day, he waited. And if you could tell it in one line? Helen's eyes found the horizon, calm, bright, unafraid. That's easy, she said. Amy and Pat exchanged a glance, smiling. Let's hear it. Helen took a slow breath, the kind that seemed to gather the whole story into one quiet truth. Then she said it, her voice steady, rich with irony and triumph. They started laughing when I got a walker, so I walked into the bank, changed every beneficiary, and left them nothing to stand on. Amy stopped walking first, then burst into laughter, the kind that carried relief, pride, and love all tangled together. Pat joined in, shaking his head, the sound of his chuckle fading into the soft hum of evening. Helen smiled, her gaze lifting to the twilight sky, the edges of it glowing gold before dusk finally claimed it. The streetlight flickered once, steadying itself, just like her, and for the first time in years, Helen Boyd felt the world match her pace.